There's something you need to know about space. It's not the vacuum that kills you. It's not the cold or the lack of oxygen. It's the silence. The absolute silence. No sound, no vibration, no hum of air or life. When you're up there, in the void, with nothing but infinite blackness stretching in every direction, it does something to you. It changes you. But no one tells you that when they're training you for a space mission. They don't tell you what the isolation will do to your mind. They don't tell you that space is alive. I was part of a small crew tasked with a simple mission: deploy a new satellite just beyond Mars' orbit. The whole thing was routine. 2 weeks in space, drop the payload, run a few diagnostics, and then head home. We were chosen because of our experience: Captain Ethan Moran, a seasoned space veteran, Dr. Marina Ochoa, a brilliant astrophysicist, Andre Collins, the flight engineer who could fix anything with a roll of duct tape and sheer willpower, and me, Lieutenant Alice Tanner, the mission pilot. Space was familiar to us. Between us, we had over 100 missions logged. But nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared us for what was waiting beyond Mars. Everything went smoothly. The launch was perfect, and after the intense roar of liftoff, we found ourselves floating in the tranquility of orbit. We were leaving Earth behind, watching as its blue glow slowly faded, swallowed by the black ocean of space. The crew was in good spirits. There's a unique kind of euphoria that comes with leaving the confines of gravity. The weightlessness, the view of the stars, there's something magical about it, like you've transcended the limitations of human existence. But as we pushed further away from Earth, past the Moon, and then past Mars, the magic started to fade. You can only stare at the stars for so long before they start staring back. By the 4th day, we were deep into the black. Earth and Mars were just small specks behind us, nothing but distant memories. That's when the comms started acting up. Static interference, Andre muttered as he adjusted the communications array. It's probably just solar radiation or a glitch in the system. The signal wasn't cutting out completely, but it was erratic. There would be moments when everything was clear, and then sudden bursts of static that distorted voices and data feeds. At first, it didn't seem like much. Just a minor inconvenience. But as the hours passed, the interference grew worse. Voices on the other end started sounding distorted, almost like they were speaking underwater. I remember the first time I heard it, this strange, garbled whisper seeping through the static. It was brief, but it sent a shiver down my spine. "Did you hear that?" I asked Captain Moran. He glanced at me, brow furrowed. "Hear what?" "That sound. Like whispering." He shook his head. "It's just the comms acting up. Probably interference from a cosmic ray burst." I wanted to believe him, but there was something about the sound that didn't sit right with me. It felt too deliberate, too human. But I didn't say anything more. Not then. 2 days later, it wasn't just the comms acting weird. The lights in the cabin started flickering intermittently. At first, it was easy to dismiss. Space travel is prone to malfunctions, the sheer complexity of it means something's always a little off. But when the lights flickered, I swear I saw something, just for a split second, in the corner of my vision. A shape, indistinct, like a shadow where there shouldn't have been one. I didn't mention it to the others. Maybe it was just fatigue or the strain of the mission. We had been on edge since the comms issue, after all. But that night, as I lay strapped in my bunk, drifting somewhere between sleep and wakefulness, I heard the whisper again. Clearer this time. My name. Alice. It was a voice, unmistakably human. It sounded like it was right next to me, whispering directly into my ear. My heart pounded in my chest, and I shot up, my eyes scanning the dim cabin. But there was no one. Just the soft hum of the ship's systems and the ever-present silence of space outside. By the 7th day, things took a more serious turn. We were supposed to be on a direct trajectory, but the ship's navigation system showed we were drifting, just slightly, but enough to concern Captain Moran. "We must have hit a patch of unaccounted for debris," Andre suggested, though he didn't sound convinced. "I've recalibrated the thrusters," Captain Moran said, but his tone was laced with unease. "We'll correct course." I watched as the stars outside the viewport seemed to shimmer unnaturally, like they were pulsing in the dark. I didn't say anything. What could I say? That the stars looked wrong? It sounded crazy. But I wasn't the only one noticing things. Later that day, Dr. Ochoa approached me, her face pale. "Alice, have you been feeling strange? Hearing things?" I hesitated before nodding. "Yeah. Whispers. My name. And shadows." Her eyes widened. "Me too. Last night, I heard a voice. It sounded like my father, but he's been dead for years. And there are moments when I feel like there's someone else on the ship with us." Her words chilled me to the core. I wasn't imagining it. Something was happening to all of us. 2 days later, everything fell apart. It started with the power. One moment, the ship was running fine, and the next, the lights went out, plunging us into complete darkness. The emergency lights kicked in, casting the cabin in a dim red glow, but all major systems were down. No propulsion, no communications, nothing. Captain Moran immediately ordered Andre to check the systems, but even he was at a loss. "There's no reason for this," Andre muttered as he worked. Everything was functioning perfectly. As he worked to restore the power, we started hearing things, loud bangs echoing through the hull. At first, we thought it might be space debris striking the ship, but the pattern of the sounds was too deliberate. It was like something, or someone, was banging on the outside, trying to get in. We sealed ourselves in the control room, panic setting in. No one spoke, but we could all feel it, that creeping sensation that we were no longer alone. The banging continued, growing louder and more persistent. Then, it stopped. For a moment, there was only silence. The kind of silence that suffocates you, that presses down on you until you feel like you can't breathe. And then the whispers began again. Only this time, it wasn't just a single voice. It was a chorus. Hundreds of overlapping voices, speaking in hushed tones, all around us. Some of the voices were familiar: my mother, my best friend from childhood, people I hadn't seen in years. Others were strangers. They whispered our names, our secrets, things no one else should have known. "Alice, Marina, Andre." Their voices curled around us like tendrils of smoke, filling the room, pressing in on us from every angle. I saw Dr. Ochoa clamp her hands over her ears, her eyes wide with terror. Andre was muttering to himself, frantically trying to bring the ship back online. And then, as suddenly as they started, the whispers stopped. When the lights finally came back on, Andre was gone. We searched every inch of the ship, every compartment, every crawl space. He wasn't anywhere. There was no sign of a struggle, no indication that he'd left the ship or been pulled out. He was just gone. Captain Moran was visibly shaken. "It doesn't make any sense," he kept saying, pacing back and forth. How could he just disappear? None of us had an answer. But deep down, we knew the truth. Whatever was out there, whatever had been whispering to us, had taken him. And it was coming for the rest of us. That night, I stayed awake, staring out of the viewport, watching the stars. There was something wrong with them. I couldn't explain it, but it felt like they were moving, shifting in ways that defied logic. The constellations no longer looked familiar. It was as if the universe itself was warping around us. Then I saw it. A shadow, moving against the backdrop of stars. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, but as I watched, I realized it was real. It was massive, a dark shape that blotted out entire sections of the sky. And it was getting closer. I scrambled to wake Captain Moran and Dr. Ochoa, but by the time they joined me at the viewport, the shadow was gone. But the fear remained. Captain Moran was the next to go. One moment, he was standing next to us in the control room, trying to work out what to do, and the next, he was gone. Just like Andre, without a trace, without a sound, nothing. I didn't hear him leave. Neither did Dr. Ochoa. He was just no longer there. At first, We searched the ship frantically, calling out his name, checking every nook and cranny, every compartment, every sealed room. But we both knew deep down that it was pointless. Whatever had taken him, whatever had taken Andre, was something we couldn't fight or even comprehend. It didn't follow the rules of reality. Now, it was just me and Dr. Ochoa. Alone. The ship felt impossibly large with only two of us left. The narrow corridors that had once felt cramped now stretched into infinity. Every shadow seemed to hide something, every flicker of light made my heart race. The whispers came more frequently now, louder, insistent. They didn't just call our names anymore. They spoke of things we had never told anyone, secrets buried deep within us, memories long forgotten. Alice! Remember when you were a child? Alone in the woods? You thought you saw something in the trees. You were right. Marina! Your father! He didn't die the way you think. He's waiting for you. In the dark. I didn't know how much more I could take. Every corner of the ship felt haunted, like it was filled with unseen eyes watching our every move. I could see the strain on Dr. Ochoa's face too, her eyes hollow, her hands trembling as she clutched a small crucifix she had pulled out from her belongings. Neither of us slept anymore. How could we, when the whispers never stopped? I don't know what day it is anymore. Time has lost all meaning. The stars outside have changed again. They don't look like stars at all anymore, just distant, swirling lights in the blackness, as if the universe itself is warping, twisting around us. Sometimes, when I look out of the viewport, I swear I can see shapes moving in the darkness. Massive, hulking shadows, too large and too far away to be anything we could understand. And they're getting closer. Dr. Ochoa has been staring out of the viewport for hours, her eyes wide and unblinking. She hasn't spoken in a while, but I can hear her muttering under her breath, praying. I want to tell her it won't help. Whatever this is, it isn't something prayer can stop. It's older than us, older than anything we've ever known. That's when I noticed the knocking again. The same deliberate banging we heard before, only now it was louder, more insistent. It echoed through the hull of the ship, rattling the walls, the floors. Dr. Ochoa jumped up, clutching her crucifix so tightly her knuckles turned white. "It's coming," she whispered. "It's here!" That's when we saw it. The knocking had stopped, but the air inside the ship felt heavy, thick, as if we were submerged in some unseen force. The view outside the ship, through the viewport, was wrong. The stars no longer resembled anything recognizable, they twisted and danced in chaotic patterns, swirling into a vortex of light and darkness. And at the center of it, a tear. A gaping rift in space itself, like a wound ripped open in the fabric of the universe. We stared in horror as it grew, expanding slowly, pulsating with an eerie, unnatural glow. It wasn't just a visual distortion. It felt alive, something about it thrummed in the air, vibrating through our bones. It was pulling us toward it. I could feel the ship drifting, drawn in like a moth to a flame. "We have to stop this," I shouted, rushing to the control panel. But it was useless. The ship wasn't responding. We were trapped, helpless as we drifted closer to the rift. Dr. Ochoa was muttering to herself again, her voice trembling with fear. "It's a doorway," she whispered. "A doorway to something else." We passed through the rift. It didn't happen all at once. As the ship crossed the threshold, I felt a sudden pressure in my head, like something was squeezing my skull. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, the blood rushing through my ears. And then the lights flickered, and everything around me seemed to stretch and distort. For a moment, I could see the ship breaking apart, our bodies, the walls, the equipment, everything was unraveling into thin threads of light, stretching out into infinity. And then we were through! The ship snapped back into reality, but everything had changed. Outside the viewport, there was no space. No stars, no blackness. Just an endless expanse of nothing. A void that stretched in every direction, pulsating faintly with a dull, rhythmic beat. I didn't understand what I was seeing. It was like we had crossed into a place outside of reality itself, a space between spaces. The ship floated, motionless, as if suspended in this strange, alien void. And then I saw them. The shadows. Moving in the distance, growing closer. At first, they were just indistinct shapes, but as they approached, I realized they weren't shadows at all. They were things. Massive, towering figures, with forms that shifted and twisted constantly, their edges dissolving into the void and reforming again in grotesque, alien shapes. There was no logic to their existence, no physical laws governing their movement. They just were. I backed away from the viewport, my heart racing. "We have to get out of here," I whispered, my voice barely audible. But there was no way out. The ship was trapped in this nightmare dimension, and the things were getting closer. Dr. Ochoa didn't move. She just stood there, staring out of the viewport with wide, unblinking eyes. I could hear her whispering again, her voice shaking. "They're ancient. Older than time. They've been waiting for us." I grabbed her arm, trying to pull her away from the viewport. "Marina, we need to go. We need to do something." But she wouldn't budge. She was lost in whatever nightmare her mind had conjured. I looked back out the viewport, and the things were almost upon us now. Their forms rippled, like living shadows made of darkness and light, and as they moved, I could hear the whispers again, louder this time, filling the entire ship. They weren't just outside anymore. They were inside, all around us, invading our minds. I don't remember what happened after that. I think I blacked out. When I woke up, I was alone. The ship was silent. The whispers had stopped, and Dr. Ochoa was gone. Just like the others. There was no sign of her, no trace that she had ever been here. I was the only one left. I wandered the ship, calling out for her, for anyone, but there was no response. The control room was empty. The mess hall was empty. Even the air felt stale, like the life support systems were slowly failing. And outside, the void remained. The strange, pulsating nothingness that had swallowed us whole. I don't know how long I've been here. Time doesn't seem to exist in this place. I stopped sleeping. There's no point. I just stood in the control room, staring out into the void, waiting. Waiting for the end. Waiting for whichever's out there to come for me. Sometimes, I still hear the whispers. Faint, almost imperceptible now, but they're there. They're always there, just beneath the surface of reality, waiting for their moment to pull me into the darkness. I don't know if anyone will ever find this message. I don't know if anyone will ever find us. But if you're out there, if you're reading this, don't come looking for us. Don't try to cross the void. Whatever you think is out here, you're wrong. Space isn't empty. It's alive. And it's watching. And once you pass into its depths, there's no coming back. Months later, a rescue mission was launched to find the missing crew of the Peregrine. They found this ship, floating just beyond Mars' orbit, completely intact. But there was no one aboard. No bodies, no signs of a struggle. The ship systems were down, but the black box recorder had survived. The final log entry was from Lieutenant Alice Tanner. It was garbled, filled with static and interference, but one word was clear. "Whispers,